CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Calvin Glen Alexander. And on today, Labor Day special day episode of the podcast, I've got Colton Davidson, fellow NFL fan, to talk through 10 burning NFL questions. So each of us kind of do a ringer style podcast here a little bit. If you listen to their network on their NFL network, NFL podcast, but want to talk through 10 burning NFL questions. We have 5 each. Go back and forth here for about 40, 45 minutes. And Colton, you know what? I'll let you take it away here with question 1 if you're ready.
Okay, question 1, which was kind of like the founding question of this episode of the podcast, as I texted you about this, is like, well, let's have a podcast about it. But where does Kyler Murray end up? Is he still with the Cardinals at the end of the season? Is he traded by the end of the season? I've been really wondering, does he even play for the Cardinals this season? That's kind of where I wanted to start with. It's a very, very fascinating question.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, Kyler Murray had an ACL or knee injury. I forget if it was ACL or MCL tear last year. Okay, thank you. Towards the end of the season. And so he's recovering from that still. He's not one of the guys who's broke camp with the Cardinals, et cetera. He still is coming back at some point. 2, with that being said, do the Cardinals really want him to be their quarterback next year? That I think is the better question of this, right? Do the Cardinals actually want Kyler Murray back next year? Or are they good with him just kind of, hey, you know what? Take some time, maybe play a game or 2 to get your stock up this season. And we know we probably want you to lose, though, so we can get Caleb Williams and trade you. I mean, is that what you're thinking? At least that's where I'm going with it.
Yeah, based off of their roster moves, they've been trading guys. They've got their own pick. They've got the Texans pick this year, and all signs are kind of pointing to neither team being very good. And they just traded away, or they cut Colt McCoy, and they're starting a 5th round rookie at quarterback. It just doesn't feel like they have any interest in winning this year. And Kyler Murray, unfortunately, he's still good enough that he can get you some wins. It's just come November, that latest Call of Duty release, he just kind of tails off. But I have no idea, and it doesn't really feel like the Cardinals have that great of a plan going forward, because they hired a defensive-minded coach, and then they got Kyler. They had this Kyler Murray stuff going on, and if they are trying to go and get Caleb Williams, it's kind of weird that they went the way that they did with this coach who basically has been getting just ripped all preseason for terrible, how kind of cringy he is. The Cardinals are just a weird team this year for sure.
Yeah, and I think about this too. Who on the Cardinals are they keeping for next year no matter what, right, on that roster? Who are their top, hey, these guys are untradeable. You know, as an NBA deal, we'd always talk about this. Shout out, I talked basketball within the first 4 minutes. But who on the Cardinals are you oh, can't let them go. They're a franchise talent. Don't want them to walk out the door, or don't want to trade them. And I just think from a talent perspective, there's not many at all. I mean, am I missing? I mean, who's their best overall player on the Cardinals? It's not Kyler. You know, if it was, you'd want to keep him, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be the deal. So
I think I think it really might be Kyler, but they've kind of already had 4 years of him, and it's kind of they kind of know what you're getting out of him now, and there's a floor, and there's also they don't have the pieces around him to even really kind of elevate him. So the only name that was coming to mind was Marquise Brown, but I think it's more it's not necessarily that they want to keep him, it's that there's not a market for him. That's kind of the only name that's coming to mind. But the Cardinals, it's just basically I want to see how this Kyler Murray thing unfolds. There's a lot of debate whether he'll even play this year. I think you're probably onto something, that he plays just to raise his stock. Me and you were talking about where he could go. It would be interesting because I think you brought up the Vikings to replace Kirk Cousins after the end of the year, because this is a Kirk Cousins contract year. And then the really fun one that I thought of was the 49ers. Just throw him in that Kyle Shanahan offense, and because who knows if Brock Purdy's just a one-hit wonder, or if Sam Darnold he's basically proven to be a human turnover machine his whole career. Wonder if you just put Kyler Murray in that offense. I wonder what that would be like. It's just kind of like a very video game idea, but it's just kind of fun to think about. I don't even know if they have the capital to go get him, but it's just something to think about.
It's a great question. I think if I'm Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Minnesota Vikings, like Kyler Murray, that seems like okay. For example, if you're the Buccaneers, you're probably going to win a couple more games this year than you would think. You play in the AFC South, which is honestly one of the worst divisions because, the NFC South. And it's honestly one of the worst divisions because you're one of the worst teams in it. But like, I don't know who's going to be good in that division. Are the Falcons going to be good with Desmond Ritter? Is Derek Carr going to have some new life and new energy because he is now playing for the Saints with a little bit more help, even though he had the best wide receiver in football, Devontae Adams, last 2 years and still wasn't good. So, but now maybe he has an offensive line or doesn't play in the AFC West and can get some more wins there. Who knows? And then, okay, you got the Panthers, who knows what we're going to see this year. It seems like probably nothing. They had the first overall draft pick this past year too. So from the Buccaneers, you probably get a couple more wins just because you're in that division than you would think. You're not going to be in contention for the number 1 or number 2 pick next year. And you could see, I mean, one of my questions here in a second is about the Rams. So I'll get to that here in a second, but it has to do with the fact that I think the Rams could also be like fighting for that number 1 overall pick. And that to me means, okay, you're Buccaneers. Why not just see what Kyler's got? And then maybe you go from one OU Heisman quarterback and Baker to another OU Heisman quarterback and Kyler, see what you got there a little bit. Change the scenery for him. Mike Evans is wide receiver, is a big guy. We know Kyler had some success throwing the ball down the field to DeAndre Hopkins, who's a big playmaker guy as well. If Chris Godwin's healthy, and all of a sudden maybe you go, you know what? Kyler just needed a bunch more weapons. And with the Cardinals, they never really clicked because all of his weapons were really DeAndre Hopkins and Zach Ertz. And I mean, just some older guys, I guess, is what I could keep going with, what they brought in AJ Green at the tail end of his career before he retired. So get Kyler out of that NFC West division where one team won the Super Bowl not too long ago, and the other 2 teams are always good, and the Niners and Seahawks, it seems. Get him over to the NFC South, and maybe he's got some more success going up against the Panthers, Saints, Panthers, Saints, and yeah.
It might. I mean, here's an interesting question. Maybe he fits in with the Atlanta Falcons somehow. I mean, I don't know what they'd want to give up to go get him, but that kind of solves a lot of their problems. But the only thing is, I don't know that Kyler's ever proven to be much of a cerebral quarterback. He's kind of always won off of just raw physical talent. But pairing him with a good coach, I hadn't thought of the Falcons until you just mentioned that. But that would be interesting. But I don't know that there's a huge market for him because like so many teams are wanting to tank because they can see Drake May and Caleb Williams, which Caleb Williams looks like the second coming of Patrick Mahomes. And like they probably just would rather wait for that than spend money on a quarterback who there's lots of questions about his attitude, his leadership, and how much prep he's going to put into stuff because everybody remembers the now infamous clause in his contract about having to do homework. So anyway, he's interesting. It's interesting.
If I'm trading for Kyler Murray, I want the peak pinnacle Kyler Murray athleticism and all that type of stuff. And it seems like he's one of those guys where year over year, I would talk about this about Russ, and I think you and I would as well too, where every year Russell Wilson, it would go from he'd be a great quarterback to start out the season, and then over time, he just was taking hits, he was scrambling a lot, he was doing a lot of play actions, smaller quarterback, shorter in the pocket, and it would get to a point where he was just taking a lot of hits and he wasn't as mobile, wasn't as good down the stretch, and his defense was there to help him out. So if you can play for a team like that, I mean, maybe the Geno Smith deal doesn't work out for year 2. It worked out for year 1. Great. Maybe he goes to the Seahawks and literally replaces Russ. It's almost the same form factor and kind of guy with a little bit more athleticism at this age. And maybe he does one of those things too. But then again, that would be too funny to see him stay in that NFC West division. It's one of the best questions. So I've got one for you though. When we're talking about Russ. So Jarrett Stidham was just signed this offseason to back up Russell Wilson with a 2-year, $10 million contract. Pretty big money if you're paying him back at quarterback. Brand new head coach and Sean Payton. And You're in a lot of the Ringer podcasts, or a lot of the ESPN podcasts, etc. Will Russ be benched? Like, does Sean Payton have enough in him to go, I'm going to bench Russell Wilson if he doesn't play well, regardless of what the contract and stuff looks like going forward? Just if you feel like Jarrett Stidham's got a better chance for you to win, are you benching Russ?
I mean, this has been talked about a bunch on the pods I've been listening to. A lot of people, they're basically, so this ties into one of my questions that I had too. So, I mean, that basically the point is it's that a lot of people were thinking that he didn't look cooked, and then also with like more and more that we're learning about just how bad that coaching staff was last year, that there's going to be a new floor for that team, and they'll kind of know how to much better use Russ after him just trying to experiment and being Drew Brees, and then surprise, he's not Drew Brees. Probably one of like the smartest quarterbacks of the last 20 years of being able to get the most out of using his mind the most. Anyway, but it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't see that there's any issue with Sean Payton. I don't see Sean Payton having any issue benching him by like week 8 if it's just not working, and seeing what they got with Stidham, because Stidham played for the Raiders a couple of good games, didn't he?
Yeah. He played a couple good games, and he's had a couple good games with the Patriots. And good is the qualifying aspect here. Like, nothing to do to keep the starting job over another guy, but good enough to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that team. They've lost some wide receiver depth, but they've got 2 pretty good running backs coming in this year with Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams. And Javonte Williams, I had him on my fantasy team last year and was loving him until he, blew his knee out like week 3 or whatever. But it might be hard to evaluate that quarterback situation when they've only got a couple of like, high quality wide receivers for him to be throwing to. But we'll see. Sean Payton's gotten more from less for sure. So we're just gonna have to see. And I would love to see Stidham get a shot, because wasn't he one of the quarterbacks that stayed with Baylor after the big old Art Briles debacle? He stayed.
I think he stayed and then transferred to Auburn, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then he was going to be the second coming at Auburn, and he was okay, but a bunch of it was like, oh, he's not playing. He's playing SEC defenses now with an SEC offense, et cetera. So the Russ being bench deal, I think it's possible. I don't think Sean Payton holds any, hey, you know what? Like, I'm going to make sure Russell Wilson is good and make sure that that's my key project. I think instead his key project is to make sure that the Broncos are good. And however that works out is going to be the deal. And I think that's consensus. So what's your second question here?
So I'll tie this into it because we just talked about Russ, but my burning question going into this season was, which old quarterback has enough left in the tank to do something? And so my example, I looked it up the list. There's not as many old quarterbacks as what I feel like there have been the last like 5 years. Rodgers, Wilson, and Stafford were the 3 oldest ones that are starting that I could think of. And after doing a little bit of research, Rodgers probably has the best team. Stafford probably has the worst team. And I think Wilson probably has the best. Well, Wilson and Stafford probably have the best coaches. And so I was just that was kind of my question. Rodgers has probably got the hardest schedule, being in that AFC East and all of the different things. He doesn't have an offensive line. There's lots of stuff coming out about in the HBO show Hard Knocks about like, hey, that offensive coordinator is not what we thought he was. It's kind of Rodgers as the offensive coordinators. We're going to see how that goes. How long until we see Diva Rodgers show up? Wilson, we've already just talked. We spent a lot of time with him, and then Stafford he's been complaining in the offseason he can't relate to players. How interested are they in winning this year? How soon until they shut down him and Cooper Kupp? Because this is the first time they own their own first round pick in like 5 years. So, and with Caleb Williams and Drake May on the board, it's going to be kind of hard to be trying to win. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's the exact question I had a little bit later, which is Aaron Rodgers good enough? I think, and then the good enough part is good enough to get the Jets to be better than last season. The answer to that one, I would say, is yes. But also, then again, last year, Aaron Rodgers wasn't putting up a lot of better numbers than Mike White and Zach Wilson. So I'd say, to answer your question directly, I think Aaron Rodgers is probably the best out of the 3 here and will play the best out of the 3 because there's just so much more expectations and not shutting him down. I mean, we just talked about Wilson being shut down. Stafford, I agree with you. I think there's a great chance, and this is kind of my Rams question, are the Rams going to go for the number 1 overall pick? Are they going to look at it and go, you know what, 1, 2 to 3, Stafford, you've been great for us. You got us a Super Bowl, but we're good. Like we're all right on this, chapter ending this way, and then next year, let's say Stafford comes back and you can kind of start some games, and then later on, then transition into Caleb Williams or Drake May, whoever, during the season, or maybe someone does a deal for Stafford, trades for 1 year of him on left on his contract next year, and goes from there. I'm with you. I love the question because Aaron Rodgers to me has got to be the guy, but there's a good chance he will just only need to be so good. Like if Russell Wilson was on the, I mean, if you just switch any of these 3 guys out and they played for the Jets next year, they'd look better than the Jets did last year because the Jets looked so bad last year. And that just goes to show you what they're working with.
So Calvin, just without looking it up, I have it pulled up, but how many wins did the Jets have last year?
6?
7. They went 7-10 with, we would probably both agree, the worst quarterback play in the entire league. And so I think that could be the argument for if Aaron Rodgers is just average, that's got to translate to 3 more wins, right? How often were they just absolutely hamstrung by Zach Wilson just getting bored, like quote, getting bored and throwing the ball, just saying F it and throwing the ball like in the middle of triple coverage. And that's really it. That's kind of the whenever it turned for me is I think one of the Ringer podcasts made this point of they had 7 wins with the worst quarterbacking room in the entire league. And like they'd rather play a Mike White with a broken rib than play Zach Wilson, and that was just where they were at. So,
yeah, I think that answers that one. Aaron Rodgers could look better than Stafford and Wilson just because of the group around him, and because he'll just need to look a little bit better than Zach Wilson, which shouldn't be hard to do. You would figure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my next question for you here actually has to do with the background. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Spotify. Either way, but that's who has more pressure this year of the 2 guys who just got paid this offseason, Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson. I would throw Jalen Hurts in there in the mix, but honestly, Jalen Hurts to me, he got paid this offseason, but he just went to the Super Bowl. He doesn't have as much pressure. So who has more pressure here to be good? Is it a former MVP, Lamar Jackson, and to do something now that he's gotten paid and was holding out to get paid? Or is it the guy who wasn't making a big deal about getting paid, but did, and Justin Herbert?
I think I would go Lamar because he's coming off of 3 years of having lots of injury concerns where they've gotten to the playoffs. He missed the playoffs last year. And like, hey, he's not been as good as in fantasy. He hasn't been as good of just an overall quarterback. Oh, he's been hamstrung by the offensive coordinator, and he doesn't have any weapons. So they fixed the offensive coordinator, gotten Todd Monken, who me and you, Calvin, are both very familiar with that name, being OSU fans, who orchestrated the Georgia offense who was, a very average college quarterback. He's known to being very creative and changing his style constantly. I'm super interested in what Todd Monken's going to do. They went out and got him some wide receivers that he wanted. Mark Andrews is probably the 2nd or 3rd best tight end, depending on how you look at it in the league. Getting him back fully healthy. Like they are primed to be really freaking good, and they're in a pretty tough division, and I think they probably have a little bit worse defense than the Chargers, but I still think there's more pressure on Lamar than ever after like basically throwing a huge fit all summer, trying to get traded and go anywhere else. And now he finally got paid. He finally got his deal. He finally got all the weapons he wanted. So, and he's been very vocal about what he's been wanting. And I think the most pressure's on him because I don't even know what Justin Herbert sounds like. So I think that there's more pressure on him for sure. And the Chargers have such a low bar right now. I think Lamar is my answer.
Okay. As a Chargers fan and former Chargers employee, but as a Chargers fan, I got to say, I think Herbert has a sneaky amount of pressure, but I agree. I think it's Lamar's deal here because at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson's been an MVP, been in the league for a while. When is he going to take that next step? to go win some playoff games, do something, and really advance this Ravens team that always has good defense, now has the offensive guys you need. Doesn't have Greg Roman anymore. Does have, our guy, quote unquote, the former Oklahoma State offensive coordinator now in the building there at the Ravens. And just like you said, took Stetson Bennett to win 2 national championships, who wasn't a guy who I thought would get drafted. Um, so at the end of the day, like, what are we thinking here with Todd Monken? Is he going to be great for that Ravens offense as well? Whereas you go to Justin Herbert, he's got another offensive coordinator who's new. Still has Brandon Staley as the head coach. The Chargers have a lot of weapons, but it feels like to me the Chargers are still on the rise. They haven't hit a plateau, and feels like the Ravens kind of hit that plateau. Where the Chargers this year they're over under by Vegas is 9.5. They get to 10 wins, they probably go to the playoffs. They get 11 wins, and they're up there contending for the division. But I think that the AFC West could be just the absolute just 2 teams that have the pinnacle of success, the best 2 teams in the AFC, and the Chargers, and of course the Chiefs. And I feel like they could also have 2 of the worst teams in the AFC, and the Broncos and Raiders, especially depending on the season goes for both of those quarterbacks, respectively. So, with that being said, I think the Chargers just will be there. I think their pressure is much more on their head coach, Brandon Staley, especially
I was
after
going to make
last
that
year.
point in a second. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I think more pressure's on the coaching staff than Herbert, because Herbert was pretty good last year, and I don't think anybody really blames him for the problems. I was going to say that this coaching staff probably more so than actually Herbert.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because at this point, like Lamar, you've got a Hall of Fame head coach in Harbaugh. You've got now an offensive coordinator trying to help you out, do a little bit better. But both these quarterbacks have that same deal. Just got paid, new OCs, who's going to make more out of it. So that was one of my questions here as well.
Man, I hope Herbert makes a lot out of it, because I got him on my fantasy team.
Yeah, I've got him on a fantasy team or 2 as well, and I'm hoping he lights him up this year. I think he could. I think the Kellen Moore offense really could be special for Justin Herbert. So we'll see.
Let's see it. So I guess that kind of ties into one of my points. One of my next question, Calvin. Which cursed team breaks through this year? The Browns, the Vikings, the Bills, the Chargers, or the Lions?
So what do you mean, like, breaks through? Because like Chargers made playoffs last year, Bears didn't, Broncos didn't, right? Lions didn't. So what does break through?
All right, so I'm gonna give this caveat. I think this caveat for everybody but the Bills is second round of the playoffs is like the bar, and then I think the Bills Super Bowl or bust. It's kind of maybe that breakthrough.
So the easiest way to say it, I think, would be the Lions. I think they play out of all those teams. They play in the easiest division. All those teams that you named, the Lions just make into the playoffs, right? I think that's the easiest one for me to say. They break through just from strength of schedule, and just from like what their pinnacle of success would mean is like, oh, we got Jared Goff and this great offense to the playoffs versus like the Chargers making that second round. Well, who knows if they match up against the Chiefs or they match up against, I mean, kind of does pay me to say, but like the Jets or even Dolphins. Okay, those teams are pretty darn good. They're going to be great in the AFC this year. They're going to be tough to beat. So, and there's plenty of other teams in the AFC as well that'll be great. I mean, the Bengals haven't said their name yet, and they'll be pretty darn good too. So, for me, I think it's the Lions. What about you?
The case, I think the Lions have a good shot. I'm kind of looking. The Vikings are kind of across the board, probably a little bit worse team than they were last year. I think I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go Chargers, just because I've got a lot of stock in the Green Bay Packers being good this year as far as my fantasy choices. I got Jordan Love as my second quarterback, and I've got some wide receivers and tight ends for them. But I think I want to go with I think the Chargers are gonna break through this year and make that second round of the playoffs, because everybody that I've listened to this offseason has been talking about how good of a defensive coach Brandon Staley is, how innovative he is on that side of the ball. Now getting matched with what I think is a really good offensive coordinator. It was an absolute mistake that the Dallas Cowboys got rid of him. Honestly, there could be a case made that let's just make Kellen Moore the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and that we might be having a whole different conversation. they might have come up before, the 25-minute mark of this podcast. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to hope that the Chargers can overcome it. The Chargers do have a big time curse, as I'm sure we're both a little bit familiar with, but that's where I'm going to go for sure.
Okay. I like it. I would love for the Chargers to get to the second round. Looking through like these AFC teams, the Chargers have a harder strength of schedule from like the Sharp Football Analysis page. They have a harder strength schedule than anyone besides the Dolphins, Raiders, and Patriots. They have the 29th hardest schedule, or fourth hardest schedule is the best way to say it here in the NFL, which wouldn't mean great for playoff seeding and just wouldn't help overall. But I still think they can get to the playoffs for sure. It just kind of getting that next step. That's what I'm more worried about the Chargers. Whereas the Lions here have the 18th. I think it's the 18th easiest, the best way to say this, 18th easiest strength of schedule. So I feel like they just have a better chance, especially with that division they play in, which comes to factor there. All right. Well, next one here, it's building off of Aaron Rodgers, but it's basically with the Packers. Is Jordan Love good? Like, do we have any idea? Is Jordan Love okay? Is he decent enough to get the Packers to win that division? It seems like one of the not the easiest division, because I would say probably that's probably the AFC South, I would think. But yeah, what's going on here? I mean, is Jordan Love good?
Well, first of all, I think I hit a wrong button. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I keep hearing people talk about like he's above average is what they're kind of basically how they're charting him in the preseason. How like Matt LaFleur's is probably a pretty darn good coach who was hamstrung by GM choices on who they targeted in the offseason, trading away Devontae Adams when they did, and then feuding with Aaron Rodgers all offseason, and just kind of had their year from hell, as Bill Simmons would say. But yeah, I think the Jordan Love, I'm not gonna be surprised if he's like better than average. I don't know that you should expect a Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers to walk through the door in Jordan Love, but I would not be surprised if he's at least better than average. And then all of the capital they've spent on defense, and then like all of these wide receivers are now a year older, and then a Vikings team that's kind of like I said earlier, really the only addition that I can think of that might improve them is the addition of Jordan Addison at wide receiver. Other than that, the defense is a little bit worse. And again, like they were the luckiest team in football last year. So, and then the Bears will just kind of probably continue to be just a nightmare no matter what they do. So I don't know that it's really their only like the major competition is Detroit, and Detroit's defense is just historically bad every year. So I mean, like there's a definite case to be made for Green Bay to be good if Jordan Love is just like above average.
Yeah, so I looked up like the NFL QBRs of 2022, quarterback rating on ESPN. And last year, Aaron Rodgers was 26th. He had a 41.3 QBR. Number one overall was Patrick Mahomes with 79.0. So this is like no one's scoring 100 here on this to point it out, but it's like double is the best in the league and more than double here. So when I look at the quarterback right above him, it's Matt Ryan, who's no longer in the league, as far as I know, unless he gets signed as a backup sometime during the season. And then the other guys that have names around him are Andy Dalton is at 21. You've got Tom Brady at 18. You've got Jimmy Garoppolo at 16. So we're talking about guys here as I move up the list that are all rated as guys who are no longer with that same team or just not starting anymore in the NFL with Dalton. So that to me means that Jordan Love could be good, could have good playmakers around him. It seems like the Packers always are good at wide receiver scouting because they always have a guy or two where you're like, Donald Driver, where did he come from? Greg Jennings, where did he come from? And they're good. And listen, Aaron likes his guys. He apparently didn't love Allen Lazard, but now Allen Lazard is a Jet. So he's over there. All this to say, I think this could be a little bit of the same kind of deal we're seeing with, Rodgers with the Jets. It's just kind of, if Rodgers is okay with the Jets just need someone to be literally just stable. Last year, they didn't have that. Well, the Packers might need someone to be good, but not great to be that. They might need someone who's just a little bit better than 41.3 QBR. And I feel like Jordan Love could be. I feel like if we're thinking Jordan Love could be around I mean, talking about QBR last year, I don't know how Marcus Mariota is qualified for QBR because he didn't play that many games, but we're talking about a guy, Mariota, who's 13th on this list, just a little bit behind Dak Prescott. And if Jordan Love can kind of be somewhere in the teens and not 26th, I think he'd be good enough for the Packers. Just like you were saying with the rest of the division not being that great.
Yeah, so last year, it's a very small sample size. I looked it up, but he had a QBR of 112, which is, that's just, it's such a, he played 26 snaps for 4 separate games for, quarterback rating of 112.2, which is just absurdly high. And it's such a small sample size, you can't really do anything with it. But if he's just average, like you were talking about, if his QBR is up in the teens, then that's good. Then it's a huge win for the Packers. So I think they're usually really well coached. So yeah, that's what I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah, and looking through another NFL QB total QBR with a minimum of 14 passing attempts per game leaders for 2022. Looking through that list, Tua is number 1, then Mahomes, then Garoppolo is 3rd. Where I'm like, Garoppolo is 3rd, but of course, he did play in 11 games last year, so he does qualify. It's kind of the guys to me that jump out are really like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they were that good last year. And then the other numbers, just like Zach Wilson was the last on the list of guys who qualify for this rating. I don't know what his exact QBR is because honestly, you have to pay to unlock it for some reason on StatMuse. So, and Aaron Rodgers was not great at all, but he was right in between Dak Prescott and Lamar Jackson in this last year. So to me, it's okay. I mean, who's good, who's bad? I don't know. But if you're comparing the two guys, yeah, you'd probably take Aaron Rodgers for this year over Jordan Love, just because I feel like one's going to just automatically be better than the other from past experience. But maybe Jordan Love is better than Aaron Rodgers was last year, and that's all you needed.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, I mean, and something that's been kind of lost in the weeds is that Rodgers was playing with a broken thumb all year. I just can't imagine trying to throw a football with a broken thumb on my throwing hand. So, well, Calvin, I'm going to leave it up to you. Do you want my rookie quarterback question or my running quarterback question?
Ooh, let's do rookie QB first. QB.
Which rookie quarterback succeeds the most this year? And I was thinking of Young versus Stroud, which was kind of like the big all through the draft process was a big debate. Ended up being, after a ton of talk about Stroud going number 1 overall, they swapped. The Panthers went with Young, probably due to his athleticism, his twitchiness is what they talk about, decision making, and he kind of shown on a worse than average Alabama team, but he's probably one of the best quarterbacks to come out of Alabama in this century. And so that kind of went with him. And I'm kind of curious, who do you think is going to be better, or do you have a third rookie quarterback that I just am not thinking of that has a chance to be really good this year?
So I think there's an option here that CJ Stroud could be better than Bryce Young just year 1. But to answer your question, I think Bryce Young will be the better guy overall. I think he's the guy where if he can find the right offensive coordinator to use his size to his advantage a little bit more, to use this. Bryce Young is not a running threat. He's not a Kyler Murray speed guy. He's not just scampering for touchdowns, but he's a super mobile quarterback. Whereas CJ Stroud is like that prototypical NFL guy you'd want. And I recently came on through ESPN. I think it was last weekend or so. But it was the Ohio State quarterfinal game last year with CJ Stroud going up against Stetson Bennett. And what stuck out to me is CJ Stroud made a bunch of good throws. They were on time. They were to the right guys. It just was, end of the day, that Georgia defense was so incredibly good. Mm-hmm. And I think CJ has probably faced a ton of really, really good NFL talent throughout his career, but that was the first time where you saw the whole Georgia defense gets drafted every year. So him having a little bit of trouble with that is okay, all right, he can probably adapt. Whereas Bryce Young, I don't think he can get taller. I mean, he's coming to the NFL. I don't think he's getting taller. I don't think he's getting bigger. So for their career, I think Stroud will have a better career, but I could see Bryce Young having offensive rookie of the year type of numbers, type of stats, just because he's going to make the Panthers look better than they did last year by a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that, and they were there was a chance they could win that division last year if one DJ Moore doesn't take off his helmet, and if they're not having to start, a USFL quarterback for a couple games, if Sam Darnold can just stop giving the ball to the defense all the time. Baker Mayfield was a disaster for him. So if they raised, you would think getting him in and being competent right off the bat, and they got the Colts former head coach to come in and be the new coach of raising the floor of the coaching, raising the floor of the quarterback play. You'd think that maybe he has the better chance, but everything I've been hearing in this preseason is like the offensive line doesn't look as good. They don't have, they traded away the only bona fide real weapon he had. Although there was some buzz around that wide receiver they had, whose name it just escapes me. I think it was Mins or something. So I'm worried that he's going to get destroyed in his first season. And then CJ Stroud, I kind of look at his supporting cast, and it's kind of like I don't really know what to expect with him. But he does have like a good running back in Dameon Pierce. So I think it's kind of see. I'm really, really rooting for Bryce Young just because I want to see the little guy, like the atypical guy succeed. Not necessarily just a little guy. I want to see like the guy that no, we have not drafted a quarterback this small like in the entire NFL history. Let's see what happens. And I'm rooting for him. And Carolina is one of those franchises I've always kind of had a soft spot for because I like the colors and how they've had like no success whatsoever in their history.
Yeah, I do like that a lot. But I'm with you on the Panthers. I want to see Bryce Young be good. Like I want to see like the guy who is just smarter, has better reads, be better than the guy with the physical talent. But I do think it's, I think it's probably at the end of the day, it's going to be, CJ Stroud because he's got that quarterback type of body and he will hopefully be given a longer leash than some other quarterbacks have come through Houston. I got a question for you here. How does Anthony Richardson fit in this for you? Is he possibly one of these, top 3 guys or?
So is this your 5th question?
No, I actually have a different 5th one.
So here, I'll tie this into. Can I tie this into my 5th question?
Oh yeah, of course.
Get both mine out of the way. So the year of the running quarterback, I completely forgot about Anthony Richardson. But in relation to like who has the best year, and I think Richardson probably should have the best year. He's got the best offensive coordinator, the most innovative. If they can figure out the Jonathan Taylor situation, he's going to have the best weapon. Michael Pittman's like not a bad wide receiver. He's not, anybody's wide receiver 1, but he's not bad. He should probably have a really good chance to be pretty good if, he can throw and hit the broadside of a barn. Like the Ringer fantasy guys are talking about constantly for fantasy, he's relevant because of how much running he might do at 6'4", 220. You're just not nearly as scared running him into the goal line as you would be like a Bryce Young, who's, allegedly 6 foot 200, but there's absolutely no way if you look, eye test says that. Man, Richardson, I think this is gonna be interesting, and it ties into my question. Is like this is the first year I can ever remember after following the NFL for the last. I started paying attention 2010-ish. So like since I've been following it, I don't remember ever having this many like straight up running quarterbacks, like college style running quarterbacks, like Jalen Hurts, Richardson, and Fields. And I want to see how that works because I love that when the NFL is not as homogenous as what it has been of like, oh no, this type of quarterback works in the NFL. Only the Ben Roethlisberger's, Tom Brady's, immobile tree trunks, only they succeed in the NFL. And now we get to see Lamar, Hurts, Fields, Richardson. Those are the running quarterbacks that are coming to mind. These guys that just look completely different than a prototypical NFL quarterback. I want to see how well will this succeed this year. We've seen Lamar succeed, but I want to see like what's next.
So, I think Justin Fields has a place in the NFL, but he was a good passer in college. Like he had more time, I know, to throw. That Ohio State offensive line has proven to be pretty darn good year over year of giving quarterbacks time. And however they scheme it, either with Ryan Day and just with Power 5 elite talent that's from the Big Ten. But also, Justin Fields has not been proven to be that passer to the next level. He's proven just definitely to be that guy who can run and who is worth like a tier 1 fantasy football draft pick just because he can run so much. When I hear a bunch of this talk about Anthony Richardson from The Ringer, from ESPN, etc., of Anthony Richardson being a great fantasy guy to pick up because he could go and just get some touchdowns. Well, in college, that was not necessarily his number one thing. He had 9 rushing touchdowns his last year at Florida. But we're thinking, okay, maybe he's going to be that guy because he's going into this Eagles offense with the same offensive coordinator last year that basically was the quarterback's coach for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. So, same head coach he's the head coach now for the Colts. He was the offensive coordinator last year for the Eagles. So, okay, all right, is Anthony Richardson a better starting point than Jalen Hurts? Well, why wasn't Anthony Richardson like great in college, right? Because Jalen Hurts was great in college. Like we know that for sure. He had all the pedigree, and then he just wasn't that accurate. So Anthony Richardson was great, but he just wasn't that. I'm guessing I'm confused here at the end of the day, like how this goes. Because Anthony Richardson, in college, he theoretically have all of it tailored to you, and he had a 53.8 passer, percentage completion rate. He threw for less than 2,000. It's for less than 3,000 yards. Granted, all this type of stuff is in 12 games, so like take it with a grain of salt. But these are the numbers to go off of. He had 17 total touchdowns. He had 9 interceptions in college. Like I just didn't think that Florida team was that great. And in college, your quarterback can take you like to literally the stratosphere. You would think.
Yeah.
So
look at the Cam Newton Auburn Tigers.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this guy's 6'4", 220, has all the tools, is worthy of a top 5 draft pick, but isn't good enough to really be that next spot. Like something seems off to me, I guess is what I'd say here.
So I mean, people have been talking about after seeing Florida just get curb stomped by Utah over the weekend. It's like maybe he just was super hamstrung by that team. And Ben Solak talks about a lot like, hey, I see lots of things that he's trying to do on the passing level where I don't think that there's things that are broken with him. I just think he needs reps and he needs time. So getting put into one of probably the most creative minds, like a top 5 creative offensive mind in the NFL, and Shane Steichen, I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I think that he's going to be able to, like, I have the most faith in that coaching staff based on what they've done with Jalen Hurts, who's just not as talented as Anthony Richardson, just doesn't have the same physical tools. I'm really curious to see how that goes. So I think that I am so excited for this season. I want to see it go. So,
well, Thursday night we've got the Lions Chiefs. I mean that'll be a really interesting game because it fears that the Chiefs defensive lineman, pass rusher, all-star guy Chris Jones won't be playing. So that'll be really interesting. But I think the last interesting question I have here is, will Jonathan Taylor be traded? He's going to be on the player. He's on the pup list, so he can't play the first 4 games of the season for the Colts, and hasn't been traded yet, but definitely has been wanting to be traded for more than a month. So this is my last question here. So we end this one out. Will Jonathan Taylor be traded?
Man, that's a really, really, really good question. So could they trade him today, even though he's on that list, or they can still trade him? But could he play for the next team?
That's the part I'm unsure of here. But the team,
no one I've heard no one smarter than me talk about this, so I don't know. It sounds like they are asking for way too much, and I just wonder if they're going to be able to see like how bad their offense. Maybe their offense starts really rough these first 3 weeks, and they go, okay, we don't want to, David Carr, our starting quarterback, so let's get him some help. Let's take some pressure off of him. Maybe they do pay him, but it just everything is indicating like that they have burned every possible bridge with Jonathan Taylor, and he does not want to play for the Colts. I'm gonna say he gets traded. I'm kind of curious. I don't know what team though he ends up on because it sounds like the Dolphins got a really dumb asking. Were asked for a really heavy price and Jalen Waddle, and I just don't think they should do that at all. So I think that he's gone, but I don't know that I could tell you where he is by week 5 or week 6.
Yeah, to me this is, I don't think he'll get traded. it appears that by putting him on the PUP list, he can't play for a team until week 5.
Okay.
And to me, that means the Colts are still searching for a trade and might eventually go, screw it. We'll just take anything because we're not going to anything. Anything's better than nothing over the offseason. But I mean, I agree. It looks like right now that basically Taylor was told, we'll trade you, but only for a first rounder. And he goes, well, if that's my worth, then just pay me what a first rounder gets paid, and I'll play for you. And the Colts don't. The Colts would much rather just not pay him that money. They'd rather pay a first rounder with some, better way to say it probably. But I'm going to say
They'd rather Jim
know?
Irsay would rather help save a whale than pay their human being on their roster.
Yeah, there's some comical stuff with that for sure. But I just don't think he gets traded. So that's where I stand. Well, Colton, what are you up to here? Which game are you looking forward to most this weekend here as we end this one out?
I just want football back in my life. I want to be able to get home from church on Sunday and watch football the rest of the day and not be interrupted. I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Well, I got to say that Sunday night game of Cowboys Giants I think will be electric.
Oh,
Monday Bills Jets, but the game I'm looking forward to the most here is to see how a fresh Tua plays in SoFi Stadium against Justin Herbert and the Chargers. I think that'll be a really fun matchup. Last year it was too, when the Dolphins had everyone healthy, including Tua. So this year, but the Chargers pulled out the win. This year, how will it look? How will it go? Sunday, 3:25 Central. Circle your cable boxes, or however you watch, probably on YouTube TV now, or at least for me. And we'll watch some Chargers Dolphins football. That's the game I got looking forward to the most here. So, Colton, well, maybe we'll continue and maybe make this a weekly deal here. But thanks so much for joining me here on the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. Please follow at the CGA Tour on Threads, on X/Twitter, Instagram, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Colton, where can everyone follow you more?
Yeah, you can follow me on X at @CD_wounded knees, and that's probably the best place to follow me.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Colton. We'll talk to you again here soon.
Yeah, talk to you later, Calvin. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.